We continue now our discussion about the revelations we learned from the IRS whistleblowers yesterday out of the Ways and Means Committee. I had to tell you, some of the most fervent reaction that I've seen in the last 24 hours comes from people who have worked in the Justice Department. You see, if you're a veteran of the Justice Department, you revere that institution. You love federal law and you love what the Department of Justice stands for. And after seeing what went on in this investigation into Hunter Biden and ultimately his father and his uncle, you're actually very angry because this is not your Justice Department. What has happened over there? Let's bring in one of those men, Hans von Spakovsky, a veteran of the Justice Department. Hans, am I overstating the case? Because it looks to me like this Justice Department has been completely warped.
I was just shocked by what I read in the transcripts of the IRS whistleblowers. I mean, I couldn't believe that these Justice Department lawyers were obstructing, interfering, doing things like when the IRS agents wanted to get a search warrant when they found out that Hunter Biden had a storage unit in Northern Virginia. The Justice Department lawyer actually called the lawyers for Hunter Biden and warned them about this, giving them the opportunity to clear that out. That, to me, is straight out unethical, and that particular lawyer, they ought to be fired, and ethics charges ought to be brought up against them by their state bar association. That's how bad it is.
And of course, Hans, for those of us who aren't veterans of the Justice Department, we're not even lawyers, but we hear that story, and we juxtapose it against, you know, a pro-life activist who was praying in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Philadelphia, and his home is raided by armed FBI agents at the crack of dawn, when he was more than willing to surrender himself. They treat that guy with an armed raid, and here Hunter Biden, he gets a heads up so he can clear out his locker.
Yeah, and look, the IRS transcripts came out after I read the plea deal that he's agreeing to, and I couldn't believe that either. I mean, that is a sweetheart deal that has just astonished me. And of course, now we know that they had enough evidence to charge him with felonies under the IRS code. And, you know, this plea deal is for supposedly not paying about $200,000 in federal taxes. And yet we now know they could have charged him with paying $2.2 million or not paying that much money that he should have. Again, you know, why would they not do that? It's hard to come up with anything other than who he is and his politics.
Yeah, and does this predate Merrick Garland? Because here's a lot of people are saying that this is Merrick Garland, and I think that obviously he needs to answer for this. But a lot of this investigation started before Joe Biden was even president, and that's also disconcerting because that makes it sound systemic, institutional.
Well, in fact, it is. And one of the biggest problems with the Justice Department, and I actually wrote a book about this, is that the career ranks, and remember, the number of political appointees is relatively small. It's overwhelmingly career lawyers there. Those ranks are, I would estimate, 95% filled with ideological leftists, people who are friendly to and love Democrats, hate Republicans, and they bring that attitude into their jobs, and you can see it in so many of the things that they do and do wrong.
Is there a fix, Hans? You know, listen, I know there's some people who just want to, you know, take a torch to the whole thing, tear down the FBI, tear down the Justice Department even. Those employees that you just cited, those aren't political appointees. They're there. It's pretty hard to fire them. How does one go about systematically repairing what needs to be repaired?
Boy, that would be extremely tough. I have to tell you, though, that one of the things that ought to be done, which would be a big task, is to completely reform, if not get rid of, the entire Merit Service Protection System. Remember, that whole thing was put in the late 1800s. It has never gone into any kind of significant reforms. And I frankly think government employees should work under the very same rules as all of us in private industry, which is employees at will. The biggest difficulty of the Justice Department is actually firing and getting rid of bad lawyers, unethical, unprofessional lawyers. It's almost impossible.
Earlier this evening, we spoke with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan. He was just as outraged as you appear to be, Hans. And he's beginning to assemble his committee members, his staffers, and they're going to begin their hearings for oversight. What do you suggest he look at first? What do you suggest he start doing?
Well, I think they need to bring in the individuals, the employees at the Justice Department who are mentioned in these IRS whistleblower complaints and transcripts, and start asking them very detailed questions. And I will tell you that if the Justice Department does not comply, isn't willing to supply these individuals so they can be cross-examined, the House needs to use its biggest power, which is the power of the purse, to start cutting the budgets of the specific offices at the Justice Department and, frankly, at the FBI, who are refusing to cooperate with them. That kind of actual budget cuts would finally get their attention.
You mentioned the FBI, and this was sort of lost in a lot of this, was the fact that there was corroboration in these whistleblowers' notes with regard to emails that Hunter Biden had engaged in with regard to payments from Ukraine. Right. These coincide almost perfectly with the allegations of a bribe to then Vice President Biden as well as Hunter Biden that the FBI sat on. They did not share this information. They didn't help these investors corroborate. That seems like obstruction of justice. And of course, the fact that the FBI had verified the legitimacy of that laptop in 2019 when they sat back quietly in the 2020 election when people were claiming that it was Russian disinformation. That is systemic rot in that institution as well, is it not, Hans?
It certainly is. And one of the biggest issues here is Chris Wray still has not given any explanation of what, if anything, they did. It appears they didn't. Why haven't they done anything to investigate this bribery possibility, all the information about this? There's no explanation for what they have done about it, why they have failed to investigate it, to further corroborate the information, and that again is a sign of the corruption within the agency.
We can keep going on and on. I literally have a list here that looks like a laundry list of all of these items that are disconcerting. You mentioned the power of the purse in the House of Representatives. Right. They have another power, and that's impeachment. And I want to set aside for a moment Congresswoman Boebert's plan to impeach President Biden. But what about starting with the director of the FBI? What about starting with perhaps some of these U.S. attorneys, political appointees, or maybe with the Attorney General? Would that be an appropriate approach to take right now?
Potentially so. I mean, certainly, the one person I've looked at on the immigration side is Mayorkas. Mayorkas ought to be impeached. But with the kind of wrongdoing we're hearing about now, that is the ultimate authority Congress has over individuals in the executive branch who are breaking the law, not carrying out their duties to enforce the law, and engaging in other kind of misbehavior. And yeah, it is something they can and they should be seriously considering.
Are you concerned, Hans, when you see news cycles like this and you see revelations like this, and you also see the corruption on itself, the appearance of the corruption, I should say, and what appears to be incredibly corrupt behavior, that's bad enough. But then when you look at what people are calling the two tiers of justice, how things are overlooked over on this side and then prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law in an unprecedented way against people like Donald Trump over the classified documents on this side. Are you concerned about how the American people are affected by this? If we can't trust our judicial system, we're on the brink of anarchy.
Oh no, I agree. And this is one of the most dangerous developments really in recent history that I can see is the partisanship that has developed into our chief law enforcement agencies in the country, the FBI and the U.S. Justice Department. And that's the kind of thing that leads to the kind of behavior you see in third world countries and dictatorships. And that is really, really dangerous. We need the same kind of hearings that we had in the 70s. Remember the church committee hearings over the corruption in the FBI? We've got to have the same thing for the FBI and the Justice Department.
Yeah, but those hearings happened because the Democrats were just as much victims of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI as Republicans were. Here, Democrats benefit from the corruption, and, well, business as usual. Hans von Spakovsky, Heritage Foundation, thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.